everybody. What's going on, family? It is about that time. It is about time for the Breaking Brown Book Club. You know what time it is, and we got to get right into it. One of the mistakes I made was reading this book so fast. I should never have read this book over like 3 to 4 days. That was too much, too fast. But family, listen. Please, while you're in there, hit that like button. Lord, somebody hit the dislike off the name, off top, off rip. You know you ain't nothing but a little negative nabob. Anyway, so family, we gotta hit the like, hit the subscribe to Brown, hit the bell, do all the stuff that I tell you to do. We're gonna try to get right into it. But this book was a lot. And so there are a lot of pages that I have to get through. I mean, I know there are a lot of stuff that I'm going to miss that you're going to get through. But I want to just kind of start by, before we get into it, I just want to start by kind of framing what we've been told. I think we have to kind of frame that. When we come of age in terms of what we hear about a lot of different groups, but today we're talking about white women specifically, is that, you know, we were all kind of the same. We were just oppressed by white men in different ways. And we all have the same enemy. It's those persnickety, pesky white men. And they kept the white women down, and they kept us down in the same way. The same way we talk about having a flatness in blackness, right? So we can't talk about where you're from, even though everybody else can do it. But when you get here, you know, you can be Nigerian, Ghanaian, whatever. But when you get here, we're all supposed to be black the same. That same thing happens in terms of kind of like how we're considered to be oppressed. It's this idea that we're all oppressed by the same people. We're all in it together. We're all part of a minority coalition. And I think insofar as white women are concerned, this book upends that. So let's start at the beginning. Family, get out your highlighters and your thingamajiggies, and you may need a libation. For this one, you may need a libation. Let's just get started. And let's get started at the beginning. Why are the pages so loud? These pages are louder than I thought. But let's get started on page 2. Because one of the things that we hear is that, like, the patriarchy. The patriarchy dominated everything. The patriarchy. Well, hold on. When you go to page 2, just go to page 2, the third paragraph. Second full paragraph. You see something very interesting towards the middle of that paragraph. It says the promise of slave ownership became an important element of their identities, talking about white girls. Something that would shape their relationships with their husbands and communities once they reached adulthood. What? The promise of slave ownership. You don't hear anything about slave ownership as it pertains to white women. Now move on to page 4. We're going to keep it moving. If you move on to page 4, you see, go down towards the second paragraph, second full paragraph. Taking her master's charge seriously, Fitz attended her young mistresses every one. Her young mistress. She's already being trained in the ways. The slave is always being enslaved person, like people want to say, is already being trained. Like, understand this happened early, and it wasn't just something that happened to little white boys to become slave master men. It was white women too. So what did she do? I was with Missy Annie all the time and tend to her. I was with her night and day. I sleep at the foot of her bed. I keep the flies off of her with the fan. Gets her a drink and such. Goes places to go things for her. To get things for her. When she am ready to go to sleep, every night I rub her feet. I rub her feet. Understand you're talking about, like, I don't even think we understand what the slaves were robbed of. This was like a dog sleeps at the foot of something. And then so she gets to have her feet rubbed before she go to bed. Now this is not, again, this is not a white man, and somebody is being trained. Well, actually, I would say two somebodies are being trained. Somebody's being trained about how to be a good slave and tend to Missy, to mistress. And somebody's been trained on how to be a good mistress, a good slave owner. And it doesn't do anything but get worse. Somebody said chapter 2 drove them insane. I I swear it didn't get really bad for me until the very end of the book. And I was like, what is going on? Like with the war. Oh, we'll get to it. We'll get to it. We will get to it. Go to page 5. Some owners forbade slaves to name their own children. You bring something into the world and you cannot name it. Slave-owning parents allowed their, this is page 5, I'm sorry. Slave-owning parents allowed their daughters to assume the roles of instructor and disciplinarian very early on. If you were not going to be a disciplinarian, why would you have that role? But we're going to get to who inherited these slaves and who inherited this power that came along with it. We're going to get there too. On the same page. Slave-owning parents also forced enslaved adults and children to use the salutations of master and mistress when referring to their children from the moment the infants were born. Can you imagine a little white boy walking past you and you got to say Mr. to him? Hi, Mr. Smith. It's a baby. Like before we even get to who owned what, like this is a baby, but you have to understand why they were all being instructed in this way. It wasn't just the white men who were being instructed in this way. Why do you think that was? Well, we get to it. And what happened if you didn't want to call? What happened if you didn't want to call that little white boy, that little white gal, Mrs. or Mr. or whatever you had to call the children? When another, page 6, top paragraph, page 6, top of the page. If you have the, I don't know if you have the Kindle, what it will be, but if you have the paper book. When another formerly enslaved woman forgot to refer to her mistress's 8 or 9 month old daughter as Miss, her mistress put her in a stock and beat her. While she was in the stocks, the woman twisted her leg until it broke. And even then continued to beat her until she was satisfied her point had been made. One enslaved woman recalled that when you called your master's children by their name, they would strip you and let the child beat you. It didn't matter whether the child was large or small. They always beat you until the blood ran down. Beat you until the blood ran down. Now let me just say one thing before we get into any of that. I want you to, we're in the very beginning of the book. We ain't even hit page 7 yet. I want you to understand, I want everybody here to just be clear on what we're seeing and understanding. We have been given this idea that like the capacity to hurt and maim and kill and murder and torture is held in white adult maleness for the most part. Sometimes late teens, but adult white maleness, that's who we should all be afraid of. What this book tells you and begins to teach you very early on about slavery is that no, like the ability to torture, the ability to hurt is not held in a gender. It's not held in like, you know, a chromosome. It's not held in that. White women and white men and even white children were trained in that very, very early on and had the capacity to do it and did do it. That taking somebody's leg and doing that till it broke, that's torture. There's no other way you can describe that to me but torture. So let's continue on. Master and mistresses. He was a master, he was a mistress. Go to page 11 for me. This was probably one of the, I know that the broken leg was, you know, that was horrendous and that was enraging, but this put me in a different context. On page 11, the rocking chair. This is what I call it, because we always think about slavery sometimes in terms of people love to put themselves back and say what they would do. But it's not just about what you would do. It's about having to watch somebody that you care about, that you love, and having to watch something happen to them. So let's just go to page 11 really quickly. At the first full paragraph. On occasion, slave-owning mothers and daughters disciplined enslaved people together. When Henrietta King was about 8 or 9 years old, she was responsible for emptying her owner's chamber pots. When she, when she went to collect the pot in her mistress's room each morning, she noticed that a piece of candy would be left on the washstand. She knew that her mistress had left it there as a test to see whether she would take it up. So you leave a piece of candy, you're a horrible person. And at first she resisted, but after several days, King yielded to temptation. Her mistress, King claimed, kept the people who labored in her home in a state of near starvation. King's mistress noticed that the candy was gone and questioned her. When she denied stealing the candy, her mistress began to whip her. King refused to remain still, so her mistress grabbed her by the legs and pinned her head under the rocker of her chair, while her younger daughter whipped her. For approximately an hour, averred by King, her mistress rocked back and forth on her head while her daughter beat her with the cowhide. The constant pressure from the rocking chair crushed the bones in the left side of King's jaw. After the beating, she could not open her mouth, and the left side constantly slid sideways to the right. So what you have is a woman who was permanently disfigured because her mistress wanted to play this game of I don't know what you call it except psychological torture. You starve me and put a piece of candy next to your chamber pot every day. And the punishment for that is you rocking on my head until my jaw breaks. Now, if that doesn't tell you what I just said is true about the ability to torture and maim and disfigure and hurt is not held in gender, I don't know what does. That was a white woman. That wasn't a little girl child with her that was beating her with the cowhide while she rocked her head. So let's keep going, fam. It's just so much in this book. It's just so much in this book. Ooh, it's a torturous book to read, though. Go to page 12 really quick, because we got to keep it moving. Oh, this page 12, the middle of the second paragraph, where Polly beat Armstrong's 9-month-old sister to death because she would not stop crying. Now, she eventually got her revenge and did something to her in the streets. But imagine what it takes imagine what that takes to do, just the initial parts of this book were just kind of dealing with cruelty and the ability and the willingness to be cruel and to torture. Let's just keep it moving. Oh, let's go all the way to page 19. Let's skip ahead a little bit. See, here's where we get to the crux of ownership and authority. What we have heard from, a lot of people in the feminist movement and so on is that white women did not have the authority to do certain things. They did not have power within their homes. And what you see when you look at page 19 is the way that these slaves were passed down, especially girls were passed down, because they were the white women needed that for the household, to cook and to clean, and their babies. Somebody had the baby had to suck somebody's tits. Apparently the white women were real sickly. That's what they said in the book. They was real sickly, and they couldn't tit a lot of time their own baby. I don't know what was going on with you. You didn't make milk. But anyway, what happened is, when you go back and look at what happened, it was very interesting in the sense of, no, even the courts allowed for them to have authority and power, right? And the slaves were passed down to them. That means you are the slave owner. And they didn't just go to the husband, because go to page 19 really quick, towards that first full paragraph. It's stipulated in the middle of the paragraph that she gave these enslaved people to them without any right in her husbands, which they now have or may have hereafter to exercise any control over said property, or in any manner to intermeddle therewith. The deed also expressed Hick's intention to convey separate and exclusive interest in said Negroes to her daughters and their children, without subjecting them in any manner to liability on occasion of any contracts of their husbands. Hicks envisioned a certain kind of life for her daughters, one that did not leave them to whatever financial burdens their husbands might make. What it means is like, listen, your husband might not be nothing. And I don't want my slaves or whatever I don't want my husband. I don't want your stuff to go to him. So we're gonna have some documentation here that says that doesn't happen. And women knew that. They totally understood. This is my property. It's not your property. Belvedere or whatever it's not your property. It's mine. These slaves came with me into the marriage, and in a lot of places in the books, you see that the women are even saying basically like, I want to take authority over them. You don't even manage my slaves right. You don't know what you're doing, so I'm going to handle this. That's a lot. That's a lot. Page 20, it talks about the female slaves. And then you go to page 28. Go to page 28. And page 28, this is kind of about the wielding of power. So go to the first full paragraph. Slave catchers captured runaway slaves for female owners and took them to local jailers who subsequently called upon these women, not their husbands, to retrieve their property. Newspapers included women's advertisements, whatever, concerning runaways, which identified them as lawful owners of those enslaved people and offered rewards for their capture and return. Women were counted among the slave owners enumerated in the schedule of slave inhabitants. Come on now. Slave catchers. The slave don't have no problem saying, yeah, this slave belongs to the woman. Go to page 35. Don't belong to the man. We ain't calling you. It ain't your slave. It's her slave now. They were her property, not yours, sir. Please send your wife back to retrieve. Now, last paragraph, page 35, this is what I was talking about. Separation of property notices published in local newspapers were critical because they served to alert the couple's community and their creditors about the change in the wife's legal status and her newly expanded control over her property. It was imperative for a married woman to make sure the notice was published because doing so reduced the likelihood that her husband's creditors would challenge the legitimacy of her separate property status and seize her assets to pay for her husband's debts. They always been on the prenup. They called it an anti something. They always been about the prenup game, protecting their property. This ain't nothing new. Like what you really see here is kind of, to me, is a fight for power amongst white people. Like this isn't like we were fighting for freedom. They were fighting for power within group. And that's what these movements were about. It's not the same fight. I'm so sorry. They even had courts, if you go to page 45, they even had courts the Chauncey courts that respected them and were beneficial to them. If you go to page 45, that's there. Going a little bit ahead. But 45, what they call them, the Chauncey courts. Yeah, women had rights. Check them, you go to court. But you watch a lot of these films. No, wasn't no court. We couldn't do nothing. We was just like you. We were slaves too, basically. We was all slaves. You can't be the slave and have slaves. How'd that work out? I'm still trying to figure that one out. So even if and go to page 52, one thing you'll see in page 52, you'll see that they had publications where they taught, well, women were even taught how to be good mistresses, masters over your slaves. And let's talk about social capital on page 52. Towards the second full paragraph, towards the middle of the page. The friends of betrothed women also played a vital role in helping them circumvent the possible pitfalls of marriage and develop ways of dealing with those that could not be avoided. That's social capital. Oh, okay, we're going to teach you how to protect your stuff. There was also talk in the book about, there was a pamphlet. There was a pamphlet about teaching you how to do your stuff, right? About how to be a woman and protect yourself within marriage. That's not a powerless situation. That's not a and it certainly is not a powerless situation when you juxtapose that against slaves. and what slavery was doing to ADOS at that moment. I don't know how we flatten this, but we'll get to what it is. Let's go to page because nobody challenged their authority. People saw them in court and it wasn't a big deal. Let's go to page 69. I didn't even know this was possible, but it says sometimes slave owning women had good reason to delegate slave punishment. So it's saying that you might have hired an overseer or whatever, but you were still the owner. You might have hired somebody to deal with your slave, but you will see the owner, because you know why? Because you had people like, slaves like Pauline Howell's enslaved aunt, for example, killed 2 male overseers after she grabbed their privates and pulled them out by the roots. That's a thing I didn't know was possible. But you gotta know what you gotta be going through with to do that. Do you know what kind of power it takes to pull a man's genitals out by the root? What have you to be going through to do that? Talk about on page 72 how the mistress whipped. The husband did a lot of talking, but the mistress, she's the one who wielded the whip. But that was one of the things that was curious to me, that was very interesting, not curious, is how much in certain circumstances the women were like intentionally crueler. Or how there are certain parts in the book where you get to where, like, we always talk about the mulatto women being or light-skinned women being in the house and just being a house slave. No, a lot of times they were prostitutes. They were sold out as prostitutes, and the complexion is one of the things that got you there. That, okay, that's what you're going to be. What's it called? The fancy trade. This is just horrible. And when you get towards the end of the book in the brothels, you see that one of the the brothel owners was a white woman who was basically whoring out slaves, female slaves, and the slaves would get in trouble and not her. How do you be in that position? How do you be that white woman? And then in 2020, we're saying that we're all oppressed the same. How? And most of these slave owners, like these females, well, most slave owners, they said during the time I think in the book, had 10 or less slaves. So this idea that, well, not everybody, yes, not the majority. The majority were not slave owners. But this idea that, like, you had to be like a wealthy, no, it was like a few. What are you talking about? So let's move on a little bit. Let's go to page 74. You see another brutal beating. The mistress accused 2 young boys who belonged to her husband of relieving themselves under the house. Right? It was a calf. She waited until her husband. She waited until her husband was away from the house. Then bound the boys in the kitchen so that they could not get away. She pulled up a chair, sat down, and ordered her slave to beat them. These are 2 young boys. They didn't even do it. They didn't pee under the house. That was the calf. But I don't even think these torturous people, that's what they was doing. The beating became so brutal that all of the slaves around the place was crying. One of the enslaved men ran to his master and told him what the mistress was doing. The master returned home as quickly as he could, but discovered that his wife had locked the door. He demanded that she open it, and she refused. He eventually had to break the door down. By that time, too much damage had been done. The boys were so traumatized that they couldn't even cry when he got there. One boy died 2 days later, and the other died within a month. Stop talking about, well, the tenderness of women and the no, that's not carried in gender. That's a different experience. That's a acculturated experience and a lot of other stuff that's not carried there. Don't tell us that story about it was the white man oppressed us too. Don't be us though. Because it looked like that was power within that family. Let's go to let me see. Let's go to page 78 real quick, because the interesting thing about 78, what they talk about is, go towards the end of that first paragraph. where a white woman murdered her slave. The murdered slave was dysentered and inquest was held. Her back was a mass of jellied muscle, and the coroner brought in a verdict of death by 6-pound paddle. But here's the kicker: medical schools across the nation bought the bodies of deceased enslaved people from southern slave owners for dissection and research, and thereby slave owners a profitable way to get rid of the body. So you just get rid of the body. Ain't that something? She thought she could find a better market. We're on chapter 4. Fam, I'm going to tell you. This is like, you got to think. You tortured little boys. These are little kids. They were playing. They didn't do anything wrong. What kind of animal are you to torture these little boys? That was not anything because, and you weren't even like, a lot of these women slave owners as you get towards the end, they're focused on money and cash. And it's a process. And it's, when you kill 2 boys, you're not even focused on who they might be or how they might help or you're not even focused on what they're worth. You just want to kill something. The sociopath, the psychopath, I don't know which one it is, but come on. And what you see is you get to page 83. When you get to page 83, you see that this was kind of a family affair. Go to page 83 towards the bottom. The argument that white women were alienated from slave markets and immune to the machinations of the trade seems far-fetched in the face of the ubiquity of slave traders and speculators and their business in urban and rural landscapes as well as in private homes. White slave-owning women frequently did not go to the slave market because the slave market came to them. They came to their houses. Not only that, they would like trade with you. When we get to the wet nurses, you see they kind of trade within each other. Oh, I'm looking for a wet nurse, looking for a slave. I need a slave who will do this. I need one for this. I need one for outside. I need one for inside. I need a good cook. You got a good cook. You don't have to go to you didn't always have to go to a market for that. And sometimes the market came to you. And sometimes it was in the community. It wasn't one of the big, flashy, showy slave markets. That's kind of what we find. It's not always one thing. So, we have like the women wasn't there, and then you see like a lot of them were in the slave market, and the people who were selling the slaves said, ladies and gentlemen. He didn't say men and women aren't allowed here. That's not what was said. That's not what was said. So I don't even understand how we got to that. Go to page 96. Here's something else that happened. If you go to 96, the next to last paragraph at the bottom. White slave owning women also negotiated with enslaved people who hoped to buy their freedom or liberty or the liberty of their loved ones. Sales that constituted another aspect of the slave market. So you were negotiating transactions. Is that right? You were negotiating transactions. As a slave owning white woman, but you weren't a slave owner, but we all minorities now and we all the same. But you were negotiating, and then you were not negotiating in good faith. If you go to page 99, an enslaved man named Henry negotiated the terms upon which he would buy his freedom from his mistress and paid nearly the full amount they agreed upon. But Henry's mistress sold him to a slave dealer anyway. Scoundrels. But go back for a quick second. What page? Go back to page 90. Because we find out on page 90, I think page 90, we find out who the real big along is. Because we didn't have no black slave trading men. But let me tell you what we did have. Ebenezer Johnson's wife frequently accompanied her husband on slave trading and kidnapping excursions. Why we didn't have her in Harriet? Because she's real. Why didn't the Harriet movie have her? Because we have real white women who were engaged in tracking us down. Why you had to make it into a black man instead of a white woman who was historically anchored in something? Oh, I see. You trying to divide and conquer ADOS. That's what you're trying to do in this Harriet movie. Okay, I got you. Yeah, Ebenezer, excursions. Johnson was a member of a notorious group that operated on the Delaware-Maryland border, kidnapping indentured and free people of color from the North and selling them into slavery in the South. These men committed their crimes under the leadership of Patty Cannon and her son-in-law Joseph. Patty Cannon. How come Patty couldn't have been in? Come on, what was Patty? How come we don't never see Patty? Y'all make up big along, but we don't ever see Patty. And she was really doing it. Stealing free people. Indentured people. Come on. Going to move through it a bit. Yeah, somebody's in the chat. They were ruthless. Yeah, they were. You see, even when we get to the wet nurses, right? Let's go to the wet nurses. Whew. Jeez. Like, that's what you see. Like, they were trading like wet nurses. Like, well, just by word of mouth. I don't think we understand. Like, when you read this book, you really begin to understand the power of social capital, and like how social capital goes all the way back, right? And it goes all the way back, and we never got any. And how that has to be intentional, because there are parts in the book at the end where you see like slaves are helping their former masters. So if that was the flip side, then why didn't it stay that way? Well, a lot of Confederates got given their land back and all that kind of stuff. Those are government actions that screwed something in place that wasn't naturally happening. What was naturally happening is that, hey, we're getting free. We're becoming openly mobile. No, the screws were put in. You see what Lincoln and them did and how they kind of hedged and everything. It's a lot. Government played a huge role in so much of this. Nearly all of it. So go to page 118 for me. One of the things you start seeing with these wet nurses, many of these ads reference the loss of an enslaved woman's child and the separation from her newborn infant. And so while the mother is mourning, the enslaved woman, while she's mourning the loss of her child, or we don't know how she lost the child. We don't know whether the child, sometimes it says the child was deceased, and sometimes it doesn't say. Sometimes we don't know. The child could have been sold away, or we don't know. So she's mourning, and you're forcing her in that mourning to nurture a white woman's child. And they didn't even want you to be sad. They had a name for it when they thought you were sad. They didn't want you to be sad. They wanted this, what's that name? Don't have the sulks. On page 121, they said they don't want nobody that has the sulks. 121 towards the middle, it says, when confronted with enslaved women's emotional response to losing or being separated from their children, white Southerners construed their grief as the sulks, or even a form of madness, vices, flaws, or pathological conditions that made such women less vulnerable and less desirable in the slave market. Now, it's funny, like for you, you can call that like, I'm sad. I lost my child. But for us, it's the sulks. You had the sulks. Is that what you need to make that level of cruelty like normal to you? It's just the sulks. Like, if a dog have fits, he just have fits and he fall out on he put his all fours in the air. Like the sulks. No, it's sadness, it's grief. But it's like they had to make us into something other than grieving human people in order to do what they did. And you see at the end that narrative change, how they begin to rationalize their behavior. We took the vicious Africans, savage Africans, and we made them something, and they wouldn't be anything without us. You see that narrative go on too. And a lot of that, even like when you talk about the daughters of the Confederacy, a lot of that is white women. And you see the thing is, it's a continuation. It's not like, oh my God, why are those white women at hangings? Those white women are look at those. They're watching a hanging. Oh my God, the white women got hoods on, and it's and you say, how did that happen? I thought, I thought that that's not who they were. And you realize, like, no, it didn't just happen. It's a continuation. Because it's a family. It's a familial power structure. And white women are dead in the center of it. In some ways, they're more powerful, and then sometimes more powerful than their husbands. So let's keep it going. Don't want you to have the sulks. It's horrible. Go to page 125. You see something very interesting, too. You see a young woman sued because she felt she got cheated in a slave trade. And if women were powerless and couldn't have anything and couldn't do anything, how do you then sue? How does that make sense? And if you go to page 125 at the bottom, the author says, given what historians have said about white women in 19th century Southern slave markets, none of Elizabeth Childress's, that's the young white lady who sued over being cheated by the people who, the slave seller who sold her the slave. Childress's actions should have been possible. One historian's explanation for women's exclusion from Southern markets was that by law and by custom, white women had little business being there. Another scholar made a similar point when he emphasized that a slave trader or a speculator was a man. Yet in her examination of women and property in colonial South Carolina, the historian Cara Azilotti found that white women actively participated in the slave marketplace, buying and selling. Laborers used them and used them as a source of revenue by renting them out. So, wealth, power is a family property. It's a family property. There was one feminist who was at a one of these things. No, there were a couple of them, but this is one, and people would say like, well, she's a feminist woman, but she came through and saw the slave markets and remarked on them. But you weren't a slave in that market. And people say, well, but Yvette, she's a feminist. I don't know how that matters to me. She saw the market, did nothing about the market, and I mean, it's just so much. None of this stuff was odd. They talked about the women who were speculators, the women who did business with men and did business with male speculators. And one woman who said, this is my money, I shall do what I want with it. I shall take it what I need it. So let's go to page. If you go to page 130, you'll see that it's not odd. Her gender and motherhood did nothing to compel her to sympathize with the enslaved woman's plight. That didn't happen. That's on page 130. No, didn't happen. Did nobody empathize with nothing. But all of a sudden, we sisters, I am woman, hear me roar. I don't know what everybody's going to do. But this ain't working. Go to page 143. I'm sorry, go to page 143. One of the things you find is that people had a lot of reasons for selling their slaves. Some people were kind of methodical. Some of these women, in terms of like, this was business and this is what I do and I know and I can pick out. I can tell how a slave going to be by how he wear his hat. If he wear it to the back, he's going to be a good upright slave. If he wear it to the front, he's going to be sneaky and steal. You remember that part? So, one of the things that you find too, if you go to page 143, that they sold slaves. Well, let me just read it for you. The top of page 143. Leah Woods decided to sell her slave precisely because she knew that doing so would remove him from all he knew and loved. Woods considered her slave Buck, who was young and very likely and was at the time worth $1,200 or $1,500, so insolent and highly provoking that she determined as a punishment to send him out of the state, far off from his kindred and those with whom he was familiar. White women sometimes decided to sell enslaved people away from their loved ones and communities for darker reasons. Eliza Bowles' first mistress sold her because Bowles' master was her father. Ooh. Sarah Hill and Margaret J. Mason wanted to sell enslaved women. Sarah Hill and Margaret J. Mason wanted to sell enslaved men because they were too white to keep. They gonna slip out of here and pass. They too white to keep. You gotta get rid of it. They too white to keep. They gonna slip out of here and pass for white, and I'm gonna lose all my money. Come on now. You see on page 44 the slave baronesses. You go to page 147, and you see prostitutes. And a lot of mulatto women were bought as like basically sex slaves. I mean, there's no really other way to say it. They were just sex slaves. And imagine knowing it, like, because of how you came out looking, that you might end up being a sex slave, because that's what they call the fancy trade. Just imagine that. And then you get in trouble for it. Of course, the mistress don't get in trouble for it. You get in trouble for it. And it's still, I mean, just commoditized in that way. Like, everything about us was made into a commodity to build wealth for other people. And it's still that way today. Just creating wealth, but not allowed to like be totally human and be our own selves and create what we want to see for our lives for ourselves. That's freedom. You even see it in terms of how we get treated and called xenophobic for just having, for having a belief and say, hey, and asking a question. Well, how does this immigration policy affect our lives? We can't do it, but Joe Rogan can do everything under the sun. And people, well, he's just open-minded. He's a free spirit. He's just how he is. That means your freedom of thought is being restricted. You don't think every other we still have parchment. You might as well say, so much hasn't changed. But let me just go. When you have, so we go on to the Civil War. I mean, we go on to like emancipation and all that stuff. Now, one of the things that you find, let me see if I can find that page, is that a lot of this stuff was made more difficult by Lincoln and his people. In terms of just the politics of it all. So go to page 152. Enslaved people had long abandoned plantations in search for freedom, and they continued to do so as the conflict grew. But now they began to run towards the federal military forces rather than away from them. Initially, they were unsure that Union soldiers sympathized with their plight, and they were right to be cautious. Enslaved people knew that they were taking enormous risks by leaving their homes and appealing to Union officers for help and protection within their federal encampments. Throughout the war, many Union soldiers proved that they were no allies to the enslaved. Many Northern soldiers were as prone as Southern counterparts to accept denigrating ideas about free and bound African-descended people in their region, and these views affected their interactions with enslaved people from the South. Even in states that seceded, some slaveholders remained committed to the Union and joined federal military forces while staunchly defending slavery. Some people sent slaves back home. Where they were home to the plantation. You go to page 165, you see they got reparations for the slaves. Slaves out here with nothing on the street. It's just... And then the white women started running. They started doing something called refugeeing. They just run from the people. Where's the little part where they said they hid the little nigglets? Where's it? Hold on. Page 173, real quick. White women were running around hiding other people's children and doing all kind of stuff. Refugeeing is on page 171. Quite reasonably, many slave-owning women feared that the Union officers would confiscate their slaves, and they were just concerned that they would lose the enslaved people they owned through flight. To reduce the likelihood of either happening, slave-owning women did what many other slaveholders did. They decided to refugee. Refugeeing involved relocating from a region threatened by Union occupation to an area deemed safer. 173. Whenever Ike Thomas's mistress got word that the Yankees were approaching, she would hide her little niggas Sometimes in the wardrobe back of her clothes, sometimes between the mattresses, or sometimes in the cane breaks. After the Yankees left, she'd ring a bell and they would know they could come out of hiding. Now those little kids, because you can't hide no grown people under mattresses. But they hid grown people. They took their slaves when they were hiding from the Union. They jailed them. They put them in jail. The slaves would be in there doing knitting or whatever the woman was doing. One of them. Now these are women, though. Like, no, I thought we would know. We're supposed to be all the same. On page 174, you see an enslaved person who is writing the president because she doesn't understand if she's free. And she said, page 174, first full paragraph, Mr. President, she wrote, it is my desire to be free, to go to see my people on the eastern shore, but my mistress won't let me. You will please let me know if we are free and what I can do. I write you for advice. Please send me word this week or as soon as possible and oblige. You have to imagine the trauma of being her, right? And you heard that you're supposed to be free, but your mistress won't let you be free. There was one passage in here where the people left, the slaves had to leave to be free without clothes, because once the mistress learned that they were trying to leave, she took the loom. And so she took what they were using to make clothes, so they had to leave naked. There's another passage in here where, and this is like, if you want to talk about the one passage, what passage in this book, there's a lot of heartbreaking the first passage that broke my heart was the one with the rocking chair. The second passage was the elderly woman, and it's on page 179. But the elderly woman who all her children had been sold away by this white woman. And this is what happened to her. So she's old now. She can't really do anything. So the white woman don't just put her out. And it says on page 179, first full paragraph, he claimed that the old lady was driven from her former mistress's premises by this Christian mistress sometime last February or March, without one particle of compensation for former services, and upon the cold charities of unfeeling community to seek home or shelter under which to cover her head. So you sold all her children away. So she wouldn't even have kids to take care of her, and you just put her out on the street. You don't care. Go. I don't have no use no more. Whatever you owe, and the union. Bye. Yeah, I sold all your kids. You just make this old enslaved lady a beggar. Like, just imagine, like, psychologically the impact of that. I think there are a lot of themes. I think there are a lot of themes here, fam, and I'm getting ready to go to the calls because I want to let a lot of people get through. But if this doesn't drive home for you how power is held, and when I think of feminism, honestly, I think of a power struggle between white men and white women. There was a struggle for power within that family structure, right? Whatever it is, but that doesn't. We never had any power. We were fighting for freedom. They were struggling amongst themselves for power. Whatever y'all do what you do. Because you saw a lot of these white women lose a lot of wealth, right? After they lost their slaves too. So I'm sure that, that kind of added to whatever fuel to the fire or whatever. But as I go to the calls, I just want you to think about this. And during the break, like, we have lived through, there's even a part in the end about Nigerian slave traders, right? And women, we have lived through the greatest con on ADOS. Like, we have been conned to the nth of conning. We talked about the Nigerian slave traders and all of that, and how we've been conned into believing we're all black the same, and we're the same as people who sold us over here. Okay. Like, you know, you could be from a slave trading place, and we consider you all the same. But you know, the white man is the enemy, but you sold us here and he bought. So y'all were seller and merchant, right? Y'all were two merchants together. Y'all were seller and buyer, two merchants together. And somehow we saw one as the enemy and one not. And it's the same thing here. Somehow we see white women as like being on our side, and this other, but it's white men who would. I don't understand how we only put white men over there. We got to push a whole lot of people over that side in terms of historically what they have done and what their contribution has been to our suffering and our oppression. And that is, and we have to have a re-understanding, and that's why this book and other books are so important, because we have to understand the real history, because it's the person who is on top that will tell and rewrite the story about what happened. And they'll have stories of all these different stories about white women getting dragged and beat on, or whatever the case may be. There's not a sameness there. No matter what you experience, it's not a sameness in terms of who we were, because of who some of you were at the time, right? That means that other ones had the capacity, even if they didn't have the wealth. You had that capacity. That is important. So I'm going to take a quick break, go to the phones. I want to see what everybody else, I want to hear what everybody else had to say about the book. It's something. It's something. So give me a few minutes as usual to set up the phones, and I will be back. All right, family, we are back. I am just going to listen. I am very curious. Hold on one sec. I am very curious about what everybody has to say because, I shouldn't have read this book so fast because it took me out. So, I actually didn't finish until early today. Whew. Anyway, fam, let me go to the calls. I'm going to 828. What is your name? Where you calling from? What's on your mind?
Hey, Yvette. This is Amani. I'm calling from. Hey, how you doing?
Pretty good.
I'm calling from North Carolina, and I'm just going to be really brief and concise. The thing that really just struck me about this book, it was a lot of things, but the interviews. And when they said that basically, a lot of researchers try to discredit the interviews, but as a sanitarian, being that old, they would have been freed maybe around their 30s or 40s. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to forget just things that happen to you over your lifespan as an adult. So I just thought that was really interesting. They were saying, you can't discredit these interviews and these stories because this happened to this person in their adult life, and they remember these things.
Yeah, so and they remember the same things. Like they remembered like specific things about the mistress and what she controlled and what she did. And they were in the slaves were in the house. Like they were there. They were firsthand witnesses. Like how do you discount like firsthand like and even though I don't know, regardless of what they meant or whatever, like those firsthand interviews to me were really, really touching in terms of because it's all there's a quality of kind of perseverance about it and kind of I don't know, there's something about those firsthand interviews I just found really, really touching. But I understand exactly what you're saying. You're right. You can't discount them.
Right. All right, Yvette, that's all I have to say. But
no problem.
Just keep doing the work that you're doing. I'm just really enjoying everything that I'm seeing that you're doing, and
thank you.
I'm just with you all the way.
Appreciate it, fam. Appreciate it. Yeah, I don't know, but isn't that kind of racist in a way to just discount let's just discount the black people who were in the room and who were closest and saw what was happening. Let's just discount all of that. Going to my next call, I am going to 516. 516. What's your name? Where you calling from? What's on your mind?
Hi, Yvette. This is Stacy from Freeport, New York. Hi, my ADOS New York City people and Chicago and all the people I met at the conference. Fantastic, unbelievable. I'm just going to start off. This book was traumatizing.
It was.
It was brutal.
It was.
It's visceral. And what I have to say is what I saw in it is slave ownership did a lot to empower white women. This was their source of power. They didn't really own the land, but if they could have slaves, then they had wealth. The slaves were their wealth, and they were protected by the law, just like we saw in American slavery, American freedom. These people got help. But there was some hope. As I looked at page 39, the slaves had an understanding of the law. They knew what was going on around them. And when we look at the second paragraph, it says, African Americans came to understand critical features of Southern law. When slave owners became insolvent and creditors sued them to recover debts and remained outstanding, or when slave owners died and their estates were distributed according to their wills or in the absence of them, enslaved people were among the most affected. If they hoped to purchase their freedom or the liberty of loved ones, they needed to know how a basic contract worked. As commodities that could be bequeathed, seized, exchanged, hired, bought, and sold, they became intimately acquainted with the values their owners affixed to them.
True. Yeah.
They also came to understand slave owners' inheritance practices, debts, loans, sublet, renting practices, installments and time payments, and mortgages. So then on page 70, I see this again. I think on page 70, what I witness here is, as we know, slavery could not have existed or continued without white women. We see on page 70 the top of the third paragraph.
Okay.
The regime of slavery could not have been sustained if the power, authority, and violence that characterized it had belonged to elite white men alone.
Yeah, that's a good. I didn't highlight that. I should highlight that. Hold on. Yeah.
Yeah, this is just. I'm just going to get on one more point because you just covered so much. But on what I found interesting was how some of these women found these niches for themselves. Like on page 143 and 144, Robertson. What she did is she would find these sickly slaves and then nurse them back to, buy these sickly slaves for a low price, nurse them back to health, and then sell them for a high price. So,
and what you but let me just add to what you're saying. Understand that that's almost like buying a stock at a very low price or something and then selling it high, to commoditize us. Didn't they say something in there like some woman was in there, or maybe it was the same woman who was selling sickly slaves as healthy and just faking it and talking about how that was probably not legal or whatever. It's just like, come on, man, how are you all putting these people on par as somehow innocent? If they had been opposed to it, slavery, all this stuff wouldn't have been possible. They had to be a part of it, like the last quote you said.
One more thing,
sure.
Which people up to page 164.
Okay.
And then I'm going to leave it at this. Nuns were involved in this.
Yep.
None.
And got reparations.
Well, thank you so much for letting me have my.
No, I appreciate those. Those were very good quotes, but I appreciate it. Yeah, nuns were not only involved; they got reparations. I mean, it's just we haven't got reparations, but the nuns got reparations for their slaves, and they're supposed to be child. But thank you, fam. I appreciate it. It's something else. It really is something else. I'm going to the next caller. I'm going to 810. 810. I'm coming to you. What's your name? Where you calling from? What's on your mind? 810. What's going on? Hello. Don't know what's going on with 810, but we gotta keep it moving. I am coming to. I'm coming to 951. 951. What's your name? Where you calling from? What's on your mind? 951.
Hi, Yvette. This is the Velvet Chino Hills.
Hey.
Thank you for taking my call.
No problem.
We met you and Tony in Kentucky at that fabulous ADOS conference.
Ah, great.
With my daughter.
I do. I remember a lot of wait. I remember a couple people with their daughters, but go ahead. I'm done.
Yeah, she was the one you said looked really, really young. But
Oh,
anyway,
yes,
I'm
she
glad
did.
you
Like a
selected this
baby.
book because I had also emailed you a couple of times in June and July suggesting that we read it.
Okay.
And I just wanted to hit on a couple of highlights that I thought were significant.
Okay.
In addition to the outright horrifying brutality, terror, and torture, I noted that in Mistress in the Making, because I did Audible, I can't give you a page number.
Okay.
In chapter 1, how crafty and skilled they were. These white women were at concealing their abuse. They maximized the pain, but they were still able to maintain their maximum trade-in value, like we were a car or a house or something like that, because they used the stinging nettle to make sure that they didn't leave any scars, so they would actually get more value for trading us in without any scars.
Yeah.
And also it was notable that they were trained from infancy to be oppressive. One incident stood out in particular where they learned that there was a black slave woman and the white slave woman. I guess she had punished her, and then she told, they came to a decision that they learned that there is no inherent chasm between violence and ladyhood.
Yeah, I remember.
And my last point that I wanted to mention was that they were very savvy at using the courts to support their ownership of their property.
Yep.
They were even taking their husbands to court when they were married to them, exposing them and opening up to public scrutiny, exposing all of their private affairs, yet they still persisted, to make sure that they used the courts to establish that that was their own separate property. And the book also stated that their power to own slaves was protected by the broader communal, legislative, and judicial institutions, and that's the government. So, like you said, the government chooses winners and losers. There was widespread recognition of claims to separate property. So it wasn't like they didn't know. The government, the legislators, allowed them to use the courts to establish ownership of their property. And that's all I wanted to say. Absolutely. So I'm glad you chose the book because it's just very impactful, very eye-opening. And that's all I have to say.
Oh, thank you, fam. I appreciate it. But yeah, the government chooses winners and losers, always has.
Okay.
And I think people have to kind of grapple with that. Like, you could have outlawed slavery, you didn't. So I think one of the things that we have to grapple with is just like, and these women were not helpless in the courts. See, the thing is, in order to have like a total kind of domination by white men, it has to mean that like you have no power in this courtroom. There's nothing that you can do in this courtroom. Like you can't walk into this courtroom as a white woman. Nah, they was walking in there and winning. Like my husband ain't good with his debts. He don't know how to take care of his stuff. And they were complaining to women. We can't get into all of it. They were complaining to other women. Like, yeah, he ain't a good steward. I'm finna do this. They was telling them this is how you do it. This is how you get your stuff off. Like they were there for each other. Social capital. Sometimes there were parts in the book where they were hiring out like they had slaves and like they had their brother-in-laws or something look after them, and they would write them and tell them like what to do. White women telling white men what to do. What are you talking about? Come on, man. Okay, let me go to the next call. Whew. I am going to what is this? I'm going to 301. What's your name? Where you calling from? What's on your mind?
Hey, Yvette. It's Nicole. I'm in North Carolina by way of the DMV. How are you?
What's going on? What you think of this book?
Girl, this book, I read it twice, okay?
Twice?
I had to read this book twice. It was so much. It was so much in it. I cried. Girl, I cried. And it was so much. I wrote down a lot of points, and I'm going to go through this real fast, and I talk fast. But it was crazy. Like, this book was so powerful. So, one of the things, because I'm very pro-reparations, and I'm very big about that for me and my people, just in life, watching my people suffer, and it's always broken my heart. And one of the things that this book really shows me, and it really expresses our right and our claim for reparations in every way possible.
Absolutely.
From them saying things like, your reparations was received when you were free, or you had, your reparations was this, or your reparations was that.
Nope.
But everything in this book shows that we have never received reparations in any way, shape, form, or fashion. We have been exploited in every way possible. But I digress. So from the aspect of how this war even began, and they try to say that it was fought to free us, it wasn't fought to free us. It was fought over the economy. It was fought over control and power over economics of this country. So it was never about us. They tried to make it seem like, oh, God helped us do this, and God did this, and God did that. No, white people lost their faith in God because they lost their slaves. You know what I'm saying? And then slaves looking at them like, oh, God punishing them more than we was ever hurt. So, they'll reach out and help the white owners who are now destitute after the war is over. And that was crazy to me. And then that's just one aspect in the politics of it. And the government, both sides, the Union and the Confederacy, had the nerve to pay reparations to the slave owners and left the slaves out hanging to dry, and had the nerve to have them build Reconstruction at low wages, slave labor, for just food and bonds. and housing, if they got it at all. Don't tell me that it was all just, oh yeah, y'all got y'all reparations and you pull yourself by your bootstraps. We did that. We fixed y'all and built ours, and then y'all came and burnt ours down. It didn't have the nerve to sit there and say, build yourself up again. With what? We have nothing left. We lost this out from insurance. We couldn't claim anything. We had no rights. These white women could get rights and get money back, but they could trade their slaves in for money. They could trade their slaves in for cotton. What could we trade in for? We're going to trade ourselves in? I would trade myself in for 40 acres and a mule, please. I'm going to leave it to my family, but we couldn't. That's just another thing. Some women said they would rather die if they couldn't have slaves, and killed over and died. Crazy. I mean, it was just crazy. Giving their freedom and then giving no way to survive except exploitative labor.
Yep.
For barely getting food, for barely clothing, to still be slaves. And for generation after generation, we fight just to have a little piece of nothing. Like the sister who called in last week, she was talking about she was homeless in a shelter, and that broke my heart. But what crushed my soul was the fact I couldn't reach out and help my sister because I ain't got nothing I can give her either. And that type of suffering with my people is what crushes me to my core. And when to hear my people say, I don't want to think about it. We don't have a choice, boo. We ain't got nothing left. We have nothing left to lose, to the point where Trump is making a point we really have nothing left to lose.
But and let me just say this. Let me just say this, family. People say I don't want to think about it. But you are it. You are the thing that you don't want to think about. Your life is the thing that you don't want to think about.
Exactly. And it baffles me. And some people who feel like, oh, well, I make a good living, I make a decent life. But if you can't help your family, what good are you? What good is your legacy if you can't pass nothing down to your children?
Absolutely.
What good are you? You are just you. You got a good life. You all right. Okay, well, good for you. The end.
You're right. I can't say nothing about anything you said, fam. You absolutely right.
Oh, well, thank you for letting me speak. I got it all in. I appreciate you. I love you to death.
Love you
and
back.
Tone, Sandy, y'all, girl, you preaching to the associate pastor over here. I'll tell you, I love y'all.
Thank you, fam. I appreciate that. I appreciate it. And I think this book hit. I think this book hit a lot of people to its core. It hit me, and I'm not easily hit. Like honestly, like when you look at this, with 1,600 people in the chat, like given what we're living right now, it should be 10,000 people minimum. I'm talking just minimum, just because this informs the past. Like she said, there is nothing to build from. Because we were supposed to get redistribution of wealth. See, what was supposed to happen is that all that land and stuff was supposed to be taken from the traitorous Confederates and given to us so that we could build up. But that's not what happened. You had Andrew Johnson redistribute it and give it all back to them, right? And, we didn't get the 4 acres and a mule. We didn't. And then the stuff that we did have, they were allowed to come and just Reconstruction failed because they were allowed to the KKK or whoever, any white person could just come and say, yeah, you got this little plot of land, I want it. You can't build from that. You can't build where your government is weaponized against you. It's not possible. And that's what we're living through. That's why the government is important. Anybody who tells you that government is not important is a moron. I'm going to the next caller. I'm going to 240. What's your name? Where you calling from? What's on your mind?
What's going on, my sister Yvette? This is Roz from the DMV.
What's going on, Roz? How you been?
You know what? I've been struggling through this book, and I got to read it, and it brought up a whole lot of things that made me very angry and upset as a kid. But we're gonna get to that.
Okay.
I'm on page 68, second paragraph. It says Cecilia Chapel recalled that her mistress would give her slaves some work to do, and she would get over her madness before she'd get up and whoop us. This was not a feminine weakness. Southern agricultural journals carried advice from the slave-owning men to other slave-owning men and urging them not to get overexcited and remain dispassionate and detached when they were beating their slave. Where they said, and ensure they would never inflict this punishment on slaves in anger. Okay, so they would give them 24 hours to calm down. That's the next day. They give them some work. So they were beating them with a clear mind, apparently. Well, not really, but they were supposed to. And then, they didn't, but let's turn it to page 73, and this is the second paragraph. Well, actually, it's the first paragraph. It says, beyond merely quarreling with their wives or scrupulously selling their slaves, some white men felt the need to physically intervene on behalf of enslaved people when their wives acted brutally towards them. So you have white men sitting up here seeing that their wives were just going crazy and beating on these people and couldn't control them, and then they were just saying, okay, well, let me intervene because she done lost her mind.
Yep, she gonna
and
kill
the other
somebody.
sister had brought up about the nettleweed, which actually burns the skin. I mean, we're seeing all kinds of cases in here, but let me take it out of the book a little bit. Now, I remember that one day my grandmother, who's long passed, but my grandmother had spoken about an ancestor who she was an enslaved woman in Virginia, and she was beaten by a woman master, a white woman that beat her so badly that she was like, a lot of the people were very frail, and or they would underfeed them. So she took a stick, and I remember my grandmother said that she was so cruel that she would beat this woman right in her spine. And the woman apparently had some kind of disc slip, but the white woman didn't care. She kept beating on the woman. So the woman was disfigured, and she had to walk, and she was dealing with a lot of pain. Now, how in the hell does, excuse my hell language, but how the hell is this somebody that you can later on say that's a sister in this feminism movement? It's crazy. It's not real. It's a con for us to sit here and try to buy into it and go against our men and to dehumanize our men. Another page, I can't think of it, what page it was on, but it was a 12-year-old little girl talking to an elder black man, and she told him, go over there to your property, go to your property. He was trying to tell her that he had a pass, and she's like, I don't want to hear it, go to your property. So she's telling an elder black man that was enslaved that he couldn't go to where he was supposed to go. And then she got back to being playful or whatever the case may be. That's crazy. You have people that had all of that, and they don't think, like I'm with Nicole, they don't think they owe us reparations. There's no way you can read this book. There's no way you can read and understand what's happening in this book and not say that we don't deserve our reparations. That's all I got to say.
And let me just say this. Let me just say this, Rod. You remember there was one part in the book about the girl who would whip the slave girl. Was it the woman? I think it was a girl. I think it was girls though. And then make her kiss the switch that she whipped her with. Y'all remember that part?
I remember that.
Child,
I remember that. People just the cruelty involved in it, and it hasn't gotten that much farther. We just had a case. I'm pulling it from the book to reality. We just had a case here in PG County where you had a policeman that was a police officer. He's a black police officer, put a man in cuffs and shot him 7 times and tried to say the man attacked him. Now, they swiftly moved on that. But had it been a white police officer, they'd be sitting there saying, no, we got to investigate. Now, this happened on Monday.
Yeah, they'd be saying he was double jointed and he came out of that.
Yeah, all of this little psychological thing where you have police that are trying to do craziness to us, and we really need our reparations. We need our reparations. All that stuff about study this book. That's what they need to do. They need to study this book and several others like it.
We got enough. We got enough books. We done wrote enough about it. We done studied enough about it. Like, they don't need to keep studying. Studying at this point is what I call postponing. That's what you're doing. You're just trying to put some time in between it till all this energy dies down so you can move on. No, we're not moving on no more. We stand on this page. All right, fam. All right, Roz, I appreciate you.
All right, good.
You have a good one. Yeah, we stand on this page now. this is the black agenda that this is the black agenda that we own right now. So I don't know what y'all planning on doing, but that ain't what we planning on doing. I'm going now to 443. 443, what's your name? Where you calling from? What's on your mind?
This is Jock from Baltimore.
Hey, Josh.
How you doing?
Pretty good.
The audiobook was 10 hours long, and I I binge listened twice because I was so outraged and enraged. So spent the work week listening to this, and the way it was narrated, I took on a different take, and because I thought the title of the book was misleading. From the title of the book, I thought that it would be empathetic to slavery, but the way it was narrated, the protagonist was the white woman. I'm sorry, the protagonist was the white woman. The antagonist was the white male. And I thought the title of the book should have been more along the lines of something like white women, how they endured their wealth during the antebellum period or something like that. And the way it was narrated was the white woman, well, first of all, her quotes, whenever she quoted something from the book, and it was ridiculous, but the way they perceived it, the white woman, they obtained their wealth they obtained their slaves through generational wealth, and then they married into these white men who tried to take away their wealth, and so they had these covertree, I think they were called covertree laws, that pretty much took away their independence. So they couldn't manage their slaves, or so they had to go to the Chandri courts or whatever to make sure they managed their, or get was able to manage their wealth. And then they talked about the overseers and how it made the white woman seem benevolent, like they were honorable.
No, it didn't.
Ladies.
There was nothing.
Well, I knew you were going to say that because I knew from the narration there were a ton of stories of the cruelty, but there was too many stories of white women, for example, when their husband would go to discipline a slave, they stopped them.
No, it was kind of the opposite. There were far more examples of there were. Did you see the examples of the husband, like the caller just said, the husbands saying you don't got to beat them that hard. And I'm not saying that the husband was being nice. The husband may have understood that this is property. You don't maim property. You don't hobble property. So some white women understood. That's why they did the stuff the other caller called about in terms of hurting you in a way that people couldn't see for the resale. But I didn't see anything in this book that spoke to the benevolence of white women. Anybody in the chat see that?
Yeah, because I listened to it twice to make sure I really picked up on that. And then they talked about, after slavery, how they lost their wealth and how they tried to endure their wealth after slavery, how they had to fight with that. And then the one quote where the woman was like, I hate it here. She pretty much said, I hate it here after slavery. But that was one thing. The other thing was the parallelisms of today that were in the book. So, for example, Roz just spoke on it, how the white woman was able to go up to a black male and say, hey, what are you doing here? And that reminded me of the day when we have all these white women calling black men for doing something as simple as cooking out or doing something like that. And then how white women always want to come to black women when they're in need or need help. And so that reminded me of when the black after slavery, and she lost all her wealth, and she went back to one of her slaves and her slave gave her the shoes or something like that to help her out. That really pissed me off. And then the last thing is, I know often when we think of systemic racism, we often think of the enforcement of slavery, but the systemic went further deep into more than just enforcement, but how the contracts were written so that these white women could hold on to their wealth, and how they could pass wealth and protect their wealth from their husbands and things like that. It was, I went through it twice, and just for me, again, it felt like it was a pro-feminist book where.
All right, I'm gonna let you go. I'm gonna let you go because I think you have maybe you need to read the actual book, or there's a listening comprehension problem. I don't know, but there was nothing pro-feminist about that. Like that's not a pro-white woman book. This is stupid. Like I let the caller talk and I let him go, but this is stupid to call this book pro-white woman. If you heard that in what you heard, you have a listening comprehension problem or reading comprehension problem. I'm not trying to be mean, but good God, if somebody decides to give it's a better investment to feed the slave than to not feed the slave or whatever, that's not the benevolence of white woman. You got to look up what the word benevolence means, if that's what you think. Or did you come into this show thinking that you were going to cast this as a pro-feminist book and use it for something? Come on, people. And don't take your time so much. Talk, man, talk. Everybody got to talk. People have to, you see, when you don't talk and when you don't get to the point, you mess up the whole vibe of the show. We got like 15 calls in the queue, and I had thought, and let me tell you, and come on, we gotta get to a point where we're concise. Kudos to the first callers, but you concise and you misinterpreted the whole book. I'm annoyed. Anyway, let me go to the next caller. I'm going now to 601. 601, what's your name? Where you calling from? What's on your mind?
Hi, Yvette. This is Sharon from Jackson, Mississippi.
Hey, Sharon.
Darn it, I had to come behind him.
Well, we love for you to do it, though.
I love the title of the book. And that's all I could think about. They were her property.
They were her property. Not here, they were her too.
I read a little about the author.
Okay.
And one thing I had read that she had gotten dissertation in the United States. Some contest she was in. That's what she won. And just based on the writing of the book, I can understand why she did receive that. I'm 56 and she's much younger than myself. And I was able to read the book from the beginning to the end very easily. It flowed very well. I had no problems at all.
Yeah.
And just based on the writings of the book, and you know me doing the ancestry, on ancestry doing the DNA stuff, I had already came across a relative who was in the military, and his military record said that some white woman was his owner. So when the book came out, I was like, sure ain't no lie, that's true. And I remember my grandmother having her children in the 30s and 40s, and she telling me about some white lady who milk ducts were blocked, and how she had to breastfeed the white woman's baby. So this long after slavery, and white women still were using black women to nurse their babies. And my son, he's 25 today, and I nursed. And when this book talked about they wanted wet nurses that were real good wet nurses, they wouldn't have had me, because I just really didn't like that 6 weeks of nursing that I did. But I did go by a friend's house after I had my son, and she had so much milk, it was in her refrigerator. She had some in the freezer.
You said you wasn't gonna nurse them, though. You weren't gonna be a wet nurse. You were gonna let the little white babies be dry.
I wasn't gonna be there. I wasn't no good one. You know, the book said they wanted some good wet nurses, and this girl, she would have been a good one. They would have wanted, because she had so much milk, and I just didn't. I didn't do good with the nursing. But when I read that part in the book, I said, oh yeah, they would have got Yvonne, because she was a goodie. She could really produce a lot of milk. She'd have been one of the ones they would have wanted.
Why are you like this?
About the wet nurses, That was all they did, and cooked and cleaned. They was in the house, you know, nursing the babies and cooking, cleaning, and seamstress. You know, that was their job. Full-time job. And then, you know, doing my ancestry, you know, finding my slave ancestors, I found so many of my great grandfathers and uncles and cousins who were in the Civil War. And they were in the colored troops, and some were Union and some were Confederate. And I thought about my fourth great-grandfather, Solomon Council. He was 5'6" and dark. Well, they said black. So I figured he was dark, very dark complexion, because, you know, they go mulatto and they go black. Well, anyway, he has a one of those things in Washington, D.C. with his name on it. And I was so proud of that. But then after reading the book, I'm thinking to myself, oh, my goodness, what did they actually do to him? Because, you know, they'll make you think, oh, you know, this, that. But from what the author said, he could have been treated any kind of way by the Union soldiers, whether he came in or whatever. And then when he got out of the Confederate War to go back to Mississippi, Claiborne County, and how he was treated. You know what I'm saying? In Mississippi. And one final thing, I thought about this. You know how we see Gone with the Wind, we see pictures and movies of the Southern Belle and those big old antebellum dresses and how pretty they look with their little parasols and all that stuff. God, please. They don't tell us the truth that these were some, you know what, you know, but they try to make the Southern Belle so gentile, you know, and all that stuff. And it's just a facade. It's a lie. It's a lie. And last thing one thing I did do, you know, everybody's been talking about how the men would whip the men with the cow whip. I looked that up. And a cow whip on eBay is 6 feet long, and it costs like $49. And a cow whip was something that Indiana Jones used. You know, in the movie?
Yeah, I know. I remember that. I remember that in the movie.
Whip, yeah,
I remember that.
It's like 6 feet long and $40. So I looked up that other thing that the women use to whip the women to keep them from messing up, you know, damaging them stuff. And that thing was brittle, needle-like hair, 6 feet. It grew 6 feet tall. And today you would have to, if you got into some of that, you would have to use hydrocortisone or calamine lotion or baking soda to treat that. And they said it feels like little bees tingling, stinging, and burning you. That's what the needle hair felt like when they whip you with that. And the last thing I want to say, I went to LSU to read the Natchez, the Barber of Natchez. I hope we can do that next. This is a diary of he was a slave and then he became free. And we got to think about it, because one thing I want to say is he was about him being free and mulatto. When I was reading his diary, one portion of it said him and one of his customers came across a newspaper on the abolition of slavery. He said in the diary, we read that and we were so tired. After we finished reading, we went to the racetrack. I'm thinking, like, get out of here. You went to the racetrack because you were so tired of reading about the abolition of slavery? And this was like 1836.
All right, Colin.
So that's something to consider.
Okay.
Thank you, sweetie.
No problem.
Love you. All right.
You have a good one. Yeah, good one. Bye-bye. Oh, she's love her to death, but she one last thing does a lot. She one last thing does about 4 one last things with. But let's keep it moving, fam. Love y'all. We know some of y'all. So let's go on to the next caller. Let's go on to I'm going to 810. What's your name? Where you calling from? What's on your mind?
Hey, Yvette, this is Gerard from ADOS Detroit.
What's going on?
I'm gonna get real quick on it. What's happening?
Not too much.
So reading this book, it let me know that the women's empowerment movement was well before the Civil War. And so I'm on page 132, I'm going to read here. It says, the directories also show that female merchants outnumber individuals who identify themselves as slave traders in the commercial center of the city, thereby suggesting that these men located their business in the proximity to female merchants, not the other way around. For example, Cohen's New Orleans and Lafayette City Directory listed 427 female merchants or businesswomen operating the city in 1849. This number jumped to 463 if the women who worked as teachers and principals and ran schools and seminaries are included. Yet only 20 male slave traders and dealers appear among them. Of course, many people involved in the slave trade did not call themselves traders, dealers, or auctioneers. They often identified themselves as planners, commissions, merchants, factors, agents, because they often sold other commodities or conducted other types of business transactions in addition to slave trades. So that hit me kind of hard because, when looking up my ancestry on ancestry.com, I found my great-grandfather and great-grandfather through the 1870 census. And my great-great-grandfather was from Virginia. Now, my people on both sides of my family, my grandparents from Mississippi. So when I found out that my great-great-grandfather actually was from Virginia, that was a big surprise to me. And then going through the website, it shows where my grandfather was possibly was on a slave ship sent from Virginia to New Orleans, and New Orleans was one of the biggest, definitely was the second largest port outside of New York in America, and that's possibly where he was sold, was in New Orleans, and ended up in Mississippi. So, but the fact that what really tripped me out was the fact that they say that they sold, they didn't know how many slave traders they were because they sold other goods, and they even alluded to that later on in the book. Like, just imagine, like, Walmart or IKEA, any type of...
Yeah, they said that. Yeah, they said, yeah. That was off the book.
You know what I'm saying? The sell of slaves was just like, any other commodity with shoes, dresses, or whatever the case may be. So, that really kind of stood out. And they talked a lot about how the proximity of these slave trade markets, they weren't all into the red districts of the part of the town, because that wasn't right. They were in major parts of where people did business, and so on and so forth. And being that I know that my ancestor was sold in New Orleans, you know what I mean? That really stood out for me.
Okay.
Going into probably, what I would suggest for another book, for a book reading, maybe not next month, but sometime, in the future, this book called The Accident of Color, The Story of Race Reconstruction by Daniel Brooke, where they look at, the free people, the mulatto people, specifically in New Orleans and Charleston, South Carolina, which were, again, two of the major areas of domestic slave ports and markets in the United States, and it dealt with because this book only touched a little bit on the surface of the mulatto issue. And I was really surprised that wasn't something that they really talked about. They just touched the surface of it with white women's disdain towards mulattoes. And because to me, I'm like, there's many black people that have, ancestry from white people, obviously, from miscegenation and rape and so on and so forth. Right. That wouldn't have played a real big factor in this book, but it didn't. It the purpose. But anyway, that book covers that a little bit. And thank you for taking my call.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Carl. Appreciate it. Going to the next call. I'm gonna keep it moving. I'm going to 917. 917. What's your name? Where you calling from? What's on your mind?
Hi, Yvette.
Hey.
This is 6 from NYC, ADOS. Thank you very much for taking my call.
No problem.
Thank you, Tom, and the two doctors. My takes from the book, like on page 32, slave owners articulated their family lines, their worldly legacies through the reproduction of their slaves and their slave-owning women. also benefited from this kind of calculus. And then also in that particular page, it said this person by the name of Brown, his grandmother gave birth to 26 children. So I was just wondering how many generations of slave owners, people that she had to bore and give tit to those children. Also, at that, I was thinking, since I was doing my ancestry, my grandmother had 12 kids, and I'm wondering what her mother, how many kids she had, and how many things that she had to do. And then on page 80, it says Martha J. Jones, living in Upper Western region of Virginia, acquired knowledge of slave market and trade from her uncle, who was a teacher in the 1930s, from the WPA interview. At that time, my father was 15 years old, so my grandfather was born like in 1880, so I'm quite sure something to that effect had to in his line also. And the last one I have is on page 116. You were talking about how they use breast milk as currency, and on page 116, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but they used that as currency also. And it was the last part was Southerners developed a system by which inform potential buyers and hirers about the quality of enslaved women's breast milk. So they use breast milk as a currency also. And that's all I have. And thank you. I hope everybody else can bring their point and be quick and concise.
Thank you, fam. You all right. I appreciate you. I sure do appreciate you, because I want to get as many people in that I can, because a lot of people read this book. And they got stuff, people got stuff they need to say. Why people got to act like that? I tell you the truth. I'm going to, I feel like I just went to this call. Is this a new call or whatever? I don't know. I'm going to 347. What's your name? Where you calling from? What's on your mind?
Hey, Yvette, what's happening?
Not too much. What's going on with you?
Fawcett Media Group on Twitter.
Okay.
Yeah, man, this book, it was so hard to get through. Like, I started this book in a timely fashion. I said, I'm going to read it. I'm going to go straight through. And I didn't end up finishing until yesterday.
It was that much.
Brutal. It just turned my stomach, and I was like, there were times where I was like, nah, this is not the right time for me to read this. This is not the right time. But what it does is it recenters this whole conversation around white womanhood in this country, and how they're complicit in the place that ADOS stay in. You know, just the idea that the property usually was passed through the matrilineal line, and that this property still remained the woman's property during marriage. I mean, they had some gigolos, sound like some white gigolos that were trying to...
Yeah, this white woman got money, I'm finna get in.
Yeah, they were trying to get rich off of marrying these widows or people who had been left stuff from their family, and then, you know, they were like, this is not a suitable suitor because he's lied about having a farm in Missouri.
Yep.
Come to find out he was the overseer down there.
Yeah, he said it was his plantation. But he's in there now. He done slid in there now.
Yeah. So, I mean, we have to talk to these women now, because this kind of strengthens our claim for slavery, because we've had to contend with a lot of feminist issues and this going back and forth, and, you know, misogyny, and, you know, I saw some posts on Twitter today where they're saying all the dudes at the Jay-Z event were misogynist and homophobic, and just for being black men in a congregated area, it just puts everything in perspective, because this is a feeling I've gotten from white women for a long time, is that there's some type of superiority, you know. And I'm gonna leave you with this passage that I read that kind of goes into the current state of hiring, because it seems like black women were the most important slaves. The black men weren't as valuable in the long run. But it says here, the Negro, this came later in, I think, the last chapter I read. The Negro as a hireling will never answer. Who should choose a black in any capacity except he be hired as a slave, held as a slave, and so bound to be obedient and faithful? And it goes into like even current day how we're being hired, you know, in these jobs. It's like, yeah, we don't want you unless you're a slave.
Mm.
We don't want you unless you're obedient. And in this government sanctioned slavery, it's really rough, man. But I thank you for your time. I'm jumping forward. I see that
Appreciate it.
chat goes crazy. When it goes.
All right, fam. I appreciate it. Thank you for calling in. I am going to what day we in? I'm going to 301 301. What's your name? Where you calling from? What's on your mind?
Good evening, Sister Yvette. How you doing? This is Marshall, also from the
What up,
DMV.
Marshall?
How you doing, sis?
How you been?
Hey, how you feeling, sister? Trying to keep the tradition alive. I know we're getting ready to go into the speed round, so I'm going to make it quick. Yeah, we got to, because we had some long-winded calls. I don't want to be the one. I want to get killed in the chat. I get killed every book club. Anyway, so there are three major quotes in this book, and the first one for me started in the introduction.
Okay.
It's on page 8, but it's the Roman numeral 8,
okay,
where there's a quote by the economist Sven Beckert, and he's making a statement that slavery was a key part of American capitalism, of course, but the crux of it, he said, slave plantations, not railroads, were America's first big business.
Mm-hmm.
And this book speaks about white women's roles in that first big business. And the entire first chapter with the making of the mistress goes into not just that, but what we have now as a social construct. When people tell you that, you know, black, white, you know, like race is a social construct, and it's all a lie. Unfortunately, it's not. When you read a book like this, I've heard you say this before, we were made into a race. And just going into that first chapter, when, you know, like, you have, you know, white women, especially those given property to slaves, you know, became, you know, wealthy, you know, after their fathers, and their husbands passed down these slaves to them. And the examples, like, there was the children's journal called, I think, the Southern Rose, or something about the rose.
Yeah, something
and
rose.
It was telling them how young white women, how to fashion. It was meant for boys and girls, but it was stated how girls read the book, and it was taught how, you know, and just the schooling in that first chapter, they saw everything, and once they were given property, they knew. If you go to page 61 and 62, it speaks about how the status as slave owners granted them access to a community that was predicated upon the ownership of human beings and afforded them rights that they did not possess in other realms of their lives. I mean, they had to hold on to this property just, you know, so that they could, like, have something, and we were the property. And so many other callers have spoken about how, you know, us, you know, being property, you know, made them basically what they are. And I'm rushing through, so forgive me. Somebody quoted 156, and basically the most heartbreaking part of this book for me was the story of Charity Bowery. And it goes so deep into what we're dealing with. And anybody can go to page 99 to 100. And this was the story about the woman who had, you know, several children. And she comes back from a long trip. And one of her daughters is crying. And she's looking at the woman, you know, in the chair, you know, counting bills. And it's almost like, did you sell one of my children? And it's like, yes. And I got a
she
great
said,
deal
but say what it said. The daughter was crying, and the daughter, she was trying to figure out like why. And she said that when you go to the page, the daughter kept saying that's brother, like saying that like that money is brother.
Money. And yes, Charity, I got a great price for them. Think about that. That's us. We have stepped away for a long time, and all of a sudden, the rights that we thought that we had, we came back, and we got white women sitting in the chair counting money, counting all, you know, counting these benefits that they've gotten from us, and we're crying. We're the ones looking at the younger generation, or those who understand it, are looking at them as like, bro, this money, that's our money. Those are our rights. Those are our things that we should get. And we're sitting there in the room. It's like, you know, did you take it?
And it's like, yes. And I'm getting a great price. I'm living a wonderful life. I'm taking all of my benefits back to my man and making something out of it. And I couldn't get past it. And lastly, let me say this here. For those of us, when Roots came out, I was very young and didn't understand it at first, but I was joking with somebody where I said, reading this book, I remember a lot of my elders talking about the first time they saw Roots, and they were like mean mugging white folks all day long. Well, let me tell you, when I read this book, I was basically mean mugging white women for weeks at a time, because I'm like, there's no way that they should have what they have off of our backs. And reading this book, I mean, there's so much more I could go into it. I'm trying to be respectful and keep it light and around, but as always, sister, I try to give you your roses whenever I call in. So as always,
Appreciate
love
it,
you. Shout out to the Breaking Brown family. Love to everybody. The chat, y'all can light me up all you want to. I don't care.
But no, I'm happy you brought. I'm happy you brought. I forgot the charity.
Quick.
Yeah.
Of course, my example, my suggestions for the book club, of course, you know, they'll be Half Again But Told will be a great segue from this book, and also Todd G. Hamilton's Immigration and the Remaking of Black America. Those are still my two choices. Hopefully, you choose one of them. And sister, love you as always. And good night to the ADOS family.
Appreciate it, fam, as always. But I'm happy he picked that book, because I'm happy he picked that charity Bowery story. If you didn't see this page 99 in the book, that really was one of the heartbreaking, to come back and she done sold you, and she sent you away. The mistress sent you away for a while so that she could take care of this sale while she sold your son away, and she's counting the bills, and I got a good price for it. Ugh. All right, I'm going to my next caller. I am going to 267. 267, what's your name? Where you calling from? What's on your mind?
Hey, Yvette, how you doing?
Pretty good.
This is Mercedes. I'm calling from Philadelphia.
What's going on?
I'm going to be quicker than quick. It's just one thing I want everybody to kind of take home from reading this book. This book was a very detailed, very graphic account of what this was like for our ancestors. But I have to remind y'all that these stories have nothing on the oral tradition and the oral retelling that white people pass down within their families. And these people currently today know so much more about the cruelty and the, individual accounts of cruelty through what they pass down to one another. And so in everything, I just like to always take that thread from slavery and pull it all the way into the present. So that's just what I wanted to say tonight. And of course, this was great.
Appreciate it, fam. Thank you for calling in. I'm going to my next caller, going to 707. 707. Oh gosh. 707, what's your name? Where you calling from? What's on your mind?
Hi, Yvette. This is Mama Ford calling from California, the Bay Area.
Okay, how you doing?
I'm blessed.
Okay.
I just wanted to say that one of the things that stuck out in the book to me was the insistence that rights be protected, upheld, and enforced, while they vehemently and violently deny our basic human rights.
Okay.
That stuck out to me. The story about the 9-month-old baby being beat to death because all 3 of my girls walked at 9 months. So that was very visceral for me.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate how the author quoted the formerly enslaved and used their actual words and language to bring their stories to life.
Mm-hmm.
Turning the idea of romantic love as a means of escape or the solution to your problems on its head, because right now there's a lot of talk about, well, if you marry into a white family or a white man, that's somehow an escapism for blackness, or that's a better life. Obviously, these white women knew that that wasn't the case. And then flipping slaves for profit through breastfeeding, or just the idea that if you had control over a human, you could kind of do what you wanted to do, whether you use that human for sex,
Mm-hmm.
For breast milk, for labor, for entertainment, just all the ways in which you can use a human body. So I just want to thank the author, Stephanie E. Jones-Rogers, for her scholarship. This book was amazing. And thank you for taking my call.
No, thank you. I appreciate it, Carla. Thank you. I thought the book was amazing too. And I appreciate the fact that it wasn't like some academics write books and I'm that just like so just it wasn't that kind of book, and it revved up like it like this book could be a series. Like it honestly could be a series, like a cable series. Like They Were Her Property, because these are horror stories. Really, they're history and they're historical, but they're horror stories as far as I can see. I'm going to 917. What's your name? Where you calling from? What's on your mind?
Yvette to the call now. What is good?
What's good, fam?
I'm all right, man. I'm calling from Brooklyn, and I know I called in on Monday. It is Divine from Brooklyn.
I know who it is.
NYC. I know you know, but I want to let the chat know just in case you start roasting me to use my name.
Oh, okay. They go get you.
Man, I know on Monday I called in and said, we was in a room full of white allies, and it was a good event. But this book, man, this book had me looking real crazy at some of them this past week.
Oh.
And so, man, I mean, that's what I can say. And I gotta say, shout out to the male callers. They saved the day after the first one. So I want to just give them love. The first caller sounded like he needed some milk, and he listened to the wrong book. So
I don't know what book he listened to. I don't know what he was talking about. How you tried to change this into a pro feminist. I don't know how that happened, but yeah, call.
Yeah, I don't know what he was talking about. But let's get to the book before they start getting.
Okay.
So yeah, because this definitely wasn't a pro white woman book or anything like that. And the title was perfect. They Were Her Property. And you and Tone talk about, and I think we're the first people I've ever heard talk about, it's not about black men, black women, white men, white women. It's about families.
Mm-hmm.
And this book, I feel like, was the epitome of that, because it showed that the present day feminist movement is really just white women fighting for their share of the flesh trade.
Ooh.
And and what they did was, I know Roz talked on it, and another caller mentioned the passage on page 16. But I just want to read it real quick,
Okay.
word for word, so I don't mess it up. And it says, I have seen a girl 12 years old in a district where in 10 miles the slave population was 50 to 1 of the free. Stop an old man on the public road, demand to know where he was going, and by what authority he ordered him to face about and return to his plantation and enforce her command with turbulent anger. When he hesitated by threatening that she would have him well whipped if he did not instantly obey. The man quailed like a spaniel, and she instantly resumed the manner of a lovely child with me, no more apprehending that she had acted unbecomingly. And I read that because it shows where, with the men, they kind of try to say slavery was a white man's institution. But with that white man, especially with the black women, the enslaved black women and the enslaved black men, in some cases that white man might have been physically intimidating. So there was that fear of physical retribution. And, you kind of back down from that if you had any urge to fight back. But what this showed is that a young child, a white child, understood the power of social capital and understood her position in it. Because even though she knew she couldn't physically herself whip that black old man, she knew that there was a means by which she could get him whipped if he didn't obey. And so with that, what the last thing I want to say, because I'm going to be concise, is that this institution of slavery, and with this book, what They Were Her Property, showed that white women reduced black men to less than children, and then in present day convinced black women to do the same and join with their cause. And that's so powerful because it just shows how much of a con it is and how there is no intersectionality with white womanhood, and that it's about families, about white families and black families. And what this book shows how through the white women, those white families maintain this system of oppression and then perpetuated it forward to where it's still present today. So as a black family, as a black ADOS family, we got advocacy to do, we got work to do, and we're going to do it together.
All right, Carla, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for calling in, fam. I appreciate you. Yeah, and I think she would have. I think the white girl would have done the same to an old black lady. They didn't care. Like you were less than a dog. So let me just keep it going though, because we got a lot of calls. A lot of calls today. So let me keep it going. I'm going to 860. Why is it going? Why is it not 860? What's your name? Where you calling from? What's on your mind?
Hello, good evening. This is Alicia Jenkins from Hartford, Connecticut. I've called in before, so I'm so glad I got through. I'm going to be concise. I have 2 points. So one, in the beginning of the book, they talked about the Irish woman who owned slaves, and how right at the beginning of, or towards the end of the Civil War, she had her slaves, and she owned them, and she was very brutal towards them. And the second part that got to me that was very pivotal was with black women being the nurses, like nursing white children and the like. So in my family, on my father's side, because I'm half Haitian, half Mississippi, my father's side has Irish ancestry in them. So, and my grandmother on my Mississippi side was a domestic.
Okay.
She picked cotton as well as cared and cleaned for white families in the South of Mississippi. And she went to Chicago and continued to do that in Chicago. Now fast forward today in 2020, 2019, I am 30 years old, and I found myself doing the work of the same work that my grandmothers did, that my grandmother did, and that my great-grandmothers did. Cleaning the toilets and working under the oppressive whip of white women. And having the fact that I have Irish ancestry in me, I've always thought that the Irish were there with us as black folk. We were in this together. And after reading how the Irish became white, and then reading about this and white Irish woman owning slaves and how brutal she was to slaves, and how she didn't want to get rid of her slaves, and how she was doing the whole refugee thing, was really angered me. And to know that I might have some of that in my ancestry also angered me. And to know that I am still living the cost of what my ancestors, the women in my family, have gone through. I endured a lot in working under the oppression of white women, to the point where I could not imagine being a slave, because I was ready to cut my white manager, because she put me through so much hell being a server and telling me that I wasn't good enough and yada yada. And I worked and cleaning toilets and everything, and it got to a point where I found that I was doing the same thing that my grandmothers were doing. So this book really honed in on the historical matter, and it brought everything into light, and I was really emotional. I was side-eyeing a lot of white women. I was reading it during my Christmas break while I was on my way to go see my family, and I was just angry. It's a lot to go through, but like, it just really angered me, and to know that I've been going through what my grandmothers have gone through and what my ancestors endured, and now that I'm here feeling and seeing it through their eyes, it was really heartbreaking, gut-wrenching, and made me really despise white women even more. I already had a suspicion of white women, but it made me despise them even more. And I say that as a woman who I am a black feminist. I say that with that being said, that black women have always been pro-equality, pro-family. We've not ever been against our men, as far as the olden days with Mariah Stewart, Sojourner Truth, and the like. White women came in and they shoehorned, like you always say, they shoehorned their way in, and they stole our power from us. And it's frustrating to know that they did that, and they fooled us to now know this history and be like, yo, like I despise you even more. So thank you for giving us this book and for clarifying. And I'm grateful for this book clarifying a lot of stuff for me. So thank you for taking my call.
No, thank you, fam. I appreciate it. And let me just say something. To what the caller just said, because don't harbor stuff that kind of hardens you on the inside. It's not healthy. But the second part of what I want to say is, we always talk about how it takes generations to build a career, right? Sometimes what you face as part of the cost of slavery is that the career that was built for you was that of a housekeeper, right? Because that's what you know how to do, because that's what that's what your mama did, that's what your grandmama did. Whether you know it or not, you know how to do it. Other people have a lucrative career that was built for them, or something else they can plug into. That's not us. So I just want you to keep that in mind when we talking about the cost of slavery and accrued disadvantage, what that really means. I'm going to the next call. I'm going to 929. What's your name? Where you calling from? Tell me about the book.
Hey, what's up, Yvette? Can
Not
you
too
hear me
much.
okay?
Huh?
Can you hear me okay,
Oh, I can
Yvette?
hear you fine, fam.
All right, great. Hi, this is Ian. I'm a professional truck driver. Right now I'm out in Texas. I don't live in Texas right now, but I'm just hunkered down for the night in my truck, and I'm just going to give you comments on the book. But I lived in Orlando, Florida. I moved, and I'm moving back to the Northeast. So when I get out of this truck and get planted, I'm going to get with some chapters up there and try to talk it up and chop it up with some people with some chapters up in the Northeast. Okay, my piece of the book, chapter 4, she thought she could find a better market. Page 116. It states that the slave market in all aspects was a pervasive feature of enslaved African Americans' daily lives, and a direct and indirect encounter with 3 dimensions of the slave market economy: slave auctions and sales, inherited or debt collection, and self-purchase, offered opportunities to learn about credit, debt, and contact, allowed them to engage in financial negotiations, and taught them to develop strategies for fiscal management. They calculate their own value, establish the price for their freedom, indeed terms of their payment, and work until they reach their financial goal. These financial calculations and dealings challenge us to rethink the intellectual and economic relationship between slavery and freedom for African Americans in the 19th centuries, and their roles slave-owning women portrayed in the process. So what I got out of that passage is that they were building strategies to help manipulate we were their source of income. So they're using us and strategizing. And shout out to that brother right there, the last brother from NYC, Brooklyn, my old hometown, old 5 boroughs. He hit it on the nose when he said that we were like their commodity. We were like their come up. So with this right here showed, in this passage that I just read, it showed that as they were doing this vicious psychological behavioral process to our ancestors, they were learning how to take it off of debt, do this, and they were just like using it like commodities of today. So that's what really struck out to me from that passage, and what I wanted to bring out and relate to you. Shout out to you and Tone. You guys are doing great work. Yo, I have got to get my butt to Kentucky for that next conference.
Absolutely do. You absolutely do.
I didn't go to the first one, but I was in my truck looking on the online chat. You know, I had paid for it online and was just watching it in my truck eating, and I was just absorbing it. I was like, okay. So yo, I love this movement, man. This is, I'm real passionate. I try to talk to my people about this, but a lot of my family like, we ain't gonna get it. So I'm like, all right, I already know how y'all coming. I'm not even gonna waste my time, and I just try to build myself with like-minded individuals online, on Twitter, and just absorbing,
Absolutely.
man.
Absolutely.
So
thank you, fam. Absolutely.
I love what you guys are doing, man. Keep up the good work, Yvette, man. And I hope to see. I see you in I see you in Louisville.
All right, appreciate it, fam. See you there. See you there. See you there. See you in Louisville. All right, fam. Lightning round because it's midnight, so let's try to get in a few more callers, but let's just try to keep it quick because I want to hear what everybody got to say. But let's try to keep it quick. 251. I'm coming to you. 251. What's your name? Where you calling from? And tell me about the book.
Hi, this is Scarlett from Seattle.
Hey, Scarlett.
I really this book really got to me, especially the part about the white women loosing black women's breasts.
Mm-hmm.
Just the thought of loosing someone's bodies was really just shocking to me.
Mm. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, did I lose
They did
you?
worse.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, sure. I can hear you. I can hear you fine.
Okay. So I think I really related to the last couple of calls. I can't remember the guy that called before this a couple of times about feminism. It's just funny how white women get to maintain their femininity while they systematically undermine black women all the time without having reparations and how we're portrayed in the media. So it's really something that I've been thinking about a lot. I'd like to call on other ADOS black women to reach out to other women who are not on board with this collective agenda. Because there won't be any reparations without the black women because of numbers. I'm talking just numbers. I'm not talking just. I'm just speaking numbers.
Yeah.
So other black ADOS women need to reach out to these black feminists, these other black women who are not a part of this movement. We need to figure out a way how to get them back to the fold. And maybe this is something that only black women can do. Because a lot of these black women aren't going to listen to black men because they've already left our communities. But we need them to come back. So maybe we need to find out a way to reach them. That's it. I love you, sister.
Thank you. Love you back. Love you back. Love you back.
All right, bye.
Thank you, fam. Woo. It's a lot. Woo-wee. Like somebody said, oh my goodness, I don't know what we're gonna do this episode. Y'all, this book. Somebody said, somebody said there needs to be a part 2 because the queue is packed out, and I opened the queue for far more calls than I normally open the queue for at a time. And the queue is packed to the brim. I'm going to 323. 323. What's your name? Where you calling from? What's on your mind? 323. You there? We got time for your games. 323. All right. Now we tried. We got to go. 717. What's your name? Where you calling from? What's on your mind?
Yes. It was ADOS North, and I waited a whole hour to talk to you, Yvette.
Yes, ma'am.
So, now, although the other callers took my steam, they did. Okay, now, I wanted to get to a particular point for which I read in the beginning of the book. I can't remember the particular page, but I know it was in the first 3 to 5 pages of the book, and it was talking about how this slavery thing was basically a family thing. They were bred for this type of stuff.
Uh-huh.
So my point to that is, if this stuff is in their family lineage, and we're talking about Caucasians, and we're talking about the whole system of slavery, then what would make folk think that the poorness and the fact that we don't have any money is built into what ADOS is going through? I don't understand how folk don't see that.
True.
Okay?
I've always said it.
So, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
No, I said I've always said it. It's all. It doesn't leave. Like it's still in the economy somewhere. The poverty and the wealth. You're right.
So, with that being said, the next thing is I wanted to go because I had 2 points. Second point is this. Now, they were her property. Okay, so there's a whole ideology out there about white females and how they're just, sold to the earth and they're good. Meanwhile, black women get to be this, that, and the third, for which I won't mention, but, Chad, you all know what I'm talking about. So my thing is this. With all the brutality that they have practiced and all of the things, and again, it is practice, My thing is this: they were never made to pay for anything that they've done. So anything that they do is just it's like either it's ignored or it's just okay. Nobody talks about it. So my thing is this: how do you sit up and you think feminism is the way to go? I said in the chat that if you're talking about you're a feminist, then I think something's wrong with your mindset. You might be a little bit off. And like I said before, maybe you need some medication. And so I'm not with the feminism. That's not the way to go. That's not helping either one of us. And how do you compare the two, black womanhood and white feminism? Thank you. That's my point.
No, thank you, man. You went in, you got in, and she went out. She got there. You go. It's we're getting late. We've taken like almost 20 calls, but the line is still full. So I need a vote, because it wouldn't happen tomorrow. I got stuff to do tomorrow, but I need a vote from the people. Do we want to take this onto a second show? Probably looking like maybe Saturday or Sunday, if you want to take this, because I've never seen the chat. I've never seen the call line quite this lit up, and I drew it out. Like I said, I made the call line take many more calls, like double the calls I normally allow in, and it's still full. Like, it's still full. So I don't think as many people. I've never had these many people in a queue for a book club. Like, for a regular conversation, we've had a lot, but I've never opened it up for this many. I've never had this many people in here. Okay, so I think the consensus is yes. So I will put on Twitter whether or not we'll do the show Saturday or Sunday. I will post on Twitter, and I'll post on YouTube too, the little community section, whether or not the show will be Saturday or Sunday. It can't be tomorrow because I already have something to do. But it'll be Saturday or Sunday, and we'll have, because I hate the people who want to really talk about this book, haven't been able to talk about the book because the book was that powerful. Like, normally if we have a book club book, if you missed it, it's okay. But this book was so consequential. I just don't want anybody who wants to have a conversation about the book to tune in. But I'll be real mad if all of y'all in the chat right now, all of y'all in the queue right now, because the queue is totally full. If all of y'all in the queue, if I do a second show and set up time for Saturday or Sunday, you don't come through, I'm gonna be pissed off. But anyway, I will put up on Twitter and the YouTube community when we'll do part 2 of the They Were Her property discussion. I'll come in, quick review, we'll go straight to the calls and have a conversation. So for tonight though, fam, that is it. Saturday or Sunday, I will keep you posted on when we will do that show. It should be around the same time though. I doubt it'll be early. It'll be around 9:30. I'll try to come in earlier since I don't have anything to really put together for the show. I just want to be able to have more of a conversation, and like, I've never seen it this full. So for this kind of show. So we'll come back in and we'll do that. But fam, we're about to go for the night. Please get everything you need. I will announce the next book for the next book club sometime soon. But please finish your libations, get ready, go to bed, do everything that you need to do. Hit that like button before you get out. If you want to donate, go to donatebrown.com, patreon.com/ycarnell, all of that good stuff that you want to do. I guess I'll be seeing y'all sometime this weekend. I will let you know and keep you updated. Until then, fam, be easy breezy, and I will talk to you soon.